Hi folks, welcome to the weekend and to Friday and to the end of January, which always seems to me to last forever every time it comes around. But on the plus side, today, I think I'm right in saying, is the final day in the 12 darkest weeks of the year, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere anyway. Okay, so what have I been reading this week? First up was Lady of Mazes by Karl Schroeder, which is a prequel of sorts, or at least set in the same universe as Ventus by the same author. And this is a strange old book. We're out around the orbit of Jupiter and we're on something called Tevan Coronal, which is an isolated ring orbital, it turns out, and that's about 2,000 kilometers across. On Tevan Coronal, communities can live as they choose, with the tech levels that they prefer enforced by something called tech locks. These manifolds or realities can overlap partly or even entirely. The perception of the other rendered impossible via those tech locks. Some people, so-called diplomats, can adjust their mental state. They can think themselves into another manifold that overlaps or borders their own. And so with this concept, Schroeder imagines our environment and the things that we can and can't do in it being first and foremost a manifestation of our values, which is then codified by the technology and the tech locks that contain them. So you see and can do what you feel comfortable seeing and doing. And in this way, Kingi's Raven manifold is a low technology, primitive, back to nature type environment that coexists with Livia's high-tech Westerhaven. The people of Westerhaven can access something called Inscape. It's a sort of pervasive virtual reality, and they can replace themselves with an anime, leaving mid-conversation if they want to, and their anime will continue it for them. And they can invoke something called a society, a virtual grouping of gossiping, squabbling advisors made up of friends and family past and present. On Tevan, then, the boundaries between the real and the virtual are blended, to say the least. Livia is one such diplomat, and she goes to Raven to investigate reports of so-called impossibles, entities or people that should not be there, that the tech locks should limit. These impossibles have dastardly plans. So Schroeder builds up a pretty richly detailed picture of life on Tevan Coronal and then gets busy destroying it, or at least changing it irrevocably. The majority of the book then is Livia and Kingi escaping from Tevan Coronal with some help from Aaron, an old friend of Livia's, to seek answers. Who or what is the mysterious 3340 that's behind the impossibles, and why is it bent on destroying or remaking Tevan? What is the mysterious nebula that surrounds the Coronals, and can Tevan Coronal be saved? Lady of Mazes is not an easy read. I felt like I was hanging on by my fingertips throughout. There's very little exposition, a little bit like the Tom Toner book that I read earlier in January, and you just kind of have to figure stuff out as you go. Schroeder does drip feed a little bit more background information as the book progresses, but you're largely on your own figuring out what the hell's going on. So it's not one to skim through on autopilot. I am intrigued, though, by the world building, and I gather Ventus would be a logical next read of the 2 or 3 of Schroeder's that I have on my shelves. Next is Hard to Be a God by the Strugatsky brothers, which is in this rather nice first edition that I found on a charity shop shelf for £2.50 or something. And that might actually be the best thing that I can say about this book. I suspected fairly early on that I wasn't going to enjoy it. The translation probably doesn't help. It's from Russian to German and German to English rather than Russian to English. So it's maybe a bit stilted, perhaps, as a result. And I think, like a lot of Soviet-era science fiction, it's really a critique of Soviet society sort of dressed up as a science fiction novel. A brief aside, when I used to take my kids forlornly to museums on the basis of kind of educating them and exposing them to some culture, they pretty quickly would start to complain that they were tired and needed some ice cream or something from the cafe, or they wanted to sit down. And they used to call it museum legs. Well, reading this book was like visiting a really tedious museum of Soviet history, and it gave me museum legs. I felt sure that I was going to DNF it about 50 pages, and then for some reason, against my better judgment, pushed on futilely for another 50 or 60 pages before just sacking it off. I decided it wasn't working for me and I was wasting time when I could be reading something that I liked much more. I said I bought it for about £2.50. It's worth about 50. It's frequently sold for 50 to 60 pounds. So I might actually just sell it. But it is a nice edition, and I'm pleased to have found it and got it for a bargain. So I don't know if I can quite bring myself to do that. But that's what it deserves. It deserves to be flogged off to whoever's foolish enough to buy it. It begs the question what I should do with the other Strugatskys on my shelf. I've obviously read Roadside Picnic, but I haven't read anything else. And if I didn't get on with that, then I'm not convinced that I didn't particularly love Roadside Picnic either. I liked it, but it didn't excite me particularly. And Hard to Be a God hasn't worked at all. So I might not read any more Strugatsky, at least not for a while. On a happier note, my next read was Against the Dark Background by Iain M. Banks, of course, and it's one of his science fiction books which is not a culture book. The first draft of which, I gather, he'd written in the mid-70s, which is well before he had a book published. So it's from fairly early on in his writing career, although this draft that he wrote in the mid-70s was substantially rewritten prior to publication. So Lady Sharrow is the protagonist, and she seems to have a price on her head. We get a lot of flashbacks to her past life as a child, as a teenager, as a student, and so on. And in those flashbacks, her cousin and half-sister feature large, along with a cast of other various family members. And you, having read a few Iain Banks, you kind of assume that these flashbacks are there for a reason and are not mere padding. And indeed, they are key to some of the plot resolutions later on. In this book, there are not one but two MacGuffins, in pursuit of which Sharrow and her team chase around the Galter system. MacGuffin number one is a book called The Universal Principles. It's an ancient book, and it's desired by the Sad Brothers, one of several quirky but powerful religious sects or cults in the book. And in return for getting their mitts on the Universal Principles, they will set free Sharrow's half-sister, she of the flashbacks, who is imprisoned there because of some infraction in their library. So that's ostensibly the main reason for wanting to find the book, but also because it might point to where the last remaining lazy gun is stashed, for which Sharrow is also on the hook for finding, for reasons which become apparent if you read the book. It's never really explained what the lazy gun is or what it can do, although it is strongly implied it's a rather potent weapon. So potent that others are intent on getting to it first, or at least on co-opting Sharrow and her team to get it for them. And the representatives of this other group are two bald-headed twins, or possibly clones, that apply pressure to Sharrow via what initially seems to be a voodoo doll, causing her extreme pain whenever it takes their fancy. The whole book is really a giant chase with added aspects of heist or robbery. Sharrow and her former genetically bonded military team spend a lot of time travelling from place to place trying to find clues or the location of first one and then the second of the two MacGuffins. There are fights, treks, backward societies on backwards planets, an android city, moving motorway rest stops, which was an interesting idea, I like the sound of that, and battles of various kinds, and of course the heists or robberies. The setting is interesting. The Galter system is isolated. It's not near any other star. So whilst there have been waves of expansion and contraction in its own solar system, this is not an interstellar society like the culture. There are some interesting touches. I thought Sharrow is an aristocrat, and we can tell that because she just has the one name. The socially mobile in the Galter system work hard to earn the right to reduce their names before eventually attaining single name status, like Prince or Madonna, I guess. The system is organised on mercantile lines with a heavy overlay of religion or cultism often mixed in. Sharrow and her bonded team were briefly combatants in something called the Tax Wars, and one of her team is tormented by someone, we don't find out who until the very end. Their name's racing animals, they're not horses, but same idea, after some fuck-up or other of his. Overall, I think I liked it, but I didn't love it. It's probably better than my lowest ranked 2 or 3 of the culture novels, but it's not up there with the best by a long shot. And of his non-culture SF novels, I much prefer The Algebraist, which I'm also looking forward to rereading at some point this year. In fact, I'll be reading all of Iain Banks' non-culture science fiction books this year, including some of his not obviously science fiction lit fic published under his Iain No M Banks moniker. And at some point, I'll put all of that together in some sort of ranking video. Very briefly then, channel stuff next. Subscribers are at 4,549, which is up 59 on last week. If you're one of those 59, or if you've stumbled across my channel for the first time today, a huge welcome to you all. I'm John, and I focus on collecting, reading, and talking nonsense about science fiction books, old and new. Comment of the week this week was from Roger, who was commenting on my overview of Adam Roberts' science fiction output, who says he's read all of them. I think that's pretty good going, given that there are 23 of them. And like several others, he recommended that Jack Glass should be my next port of call as I work my way through Adam's backlist. So thank you to Roger for taking the time to leave a comment, and thank you to all of you that do the same. As I often say, it's one of the greatest joys of running this channel. Let's take a quick look at what was on the channel this week. On Sunday, there was my monthly video looking at the tortured process of selecting my to be read pile, my TBRs for the following month, for February in this case. I'm really happy with the way that that's turned out. I've got 10 really nice books that I'm looking forward to reading, although in hindsight, I maybe should have chosen one or two less, with February being a shorter book. Plus, I've still got some of January's to finish, which we'll talk about later on. On Tuesday, there was that look at my Adam Roberts collection. So I show off the books and talk a little bit about each one. I've read about a quarter of them, the others I haven't. So I just give a brief overview of those based on what I've been able to glean from the back of the book or from Goodreads or whatever. Adam is a very interesting writer. He's one of few these days that doggedly produces singleton or standalone science fiction books. Rarely does he write anything that's part of a series. There's one or two exceptions, but for the most part, those 23 are all individual books, and the ideas in them are quite different. He's got a pretty good line in an interesting premise for a story, and he just runs with it from there. But I think if you're new to Adam's work, or if you've only read one or two of them, then I think that is well worth a look. So I commend them both to you. If you haven't watched them already, then give them a crack. On the book buying front, it's been a fairly quiet week this week. There one or two things have arrived, actually 3 or 4 now, as some arrived during the day today. And mainly they've been plugging gaps in my collections. I also received a gift from a viewer via my Amazon wishlist, which is always extremely welcome. Plus, I bought a book for brand new book money, and that arrived in the post the other day. And then there were 1 or 2 things which arrived just today. I've also placed a few orders that some of which are overseas, so they'll take 2 or 3 weeks to work their way through the postage system. I have been quite the spendthrift during January, but nearly all of that has been offset by sales of spare books and some modest amount of YouTube revenue as well. So I feel quite virtuous. I have already been doing a bit of online searching for certain books that will be part of February's purchasing frenzy. The to be hauled pile stands currently at 35 books. And it'll soon be time to record the next haul video, I think. Let's take a quick look ahead. On Sunday, there will be the wrap-up of January's reading. And if you're a regular viewer of these weekly updates, there'll be a bit of repetition because I'm just going over the same content. But more people watch those monthly wrap-ups than watch the weekly updates, so you're going to have to stand a bit of repetition. But, of course, there is always the ranking that goes with that video and a declaration of the book of the month. So if you're at all interested in that, you can give that a watch. And then at some point during the week, whenever I get round to it, what I've in mind to do, a little bit thinking about that Hard to Be a God book, which was a lucky find, is to take a look at the 10 or 15 most valuable finds. So books that I've snapped up cheap in charity shops or library sales or wherever, that have turned out, in my ignorance, to be worth a fair bit more than I paid for them. Generally speaking, as I say, more by luck than judgment. So that I'm planning to do during the week, we'll see. I am generally feeling a little bit behind the 8 ball at the moment as far as content creation goes. I don't like it when I'm hand to mouth, when I've nothing when I've nothing ready to go out. I prefer to be at least a week ahead of the game. That's better for my state of mind as well as the channel. That situation, despite my strong preferences, is likely to persist for a couple of months. As I've mentioned once or twice, as some of you know, my other hobby is long distance running, endurance running. I have foolishly signed up for a 200-mile event in April, which is the undertaking of several days, and it's on tricky terrain, and the outcome of that is far from certain. But it does require me to do quite a lot of training, and for the next 2 months, my weekends will be increasingly consumed by long runs and hikes and the inevitable snoozing that comes with those. So my content creation window at the weekends is going to shrink, not to nothing, but considerably from what it's been for the last several months. So I just need to get that training done and out of the way. And all that time on the trails is excellent for audiobook consumption, but less helpful for generating videos for this channel. So I guess what I'm saying is that I may not be able to maintain 3 videos a week tempo for the next couple of months. We shall see. All of that said, for beyond the next week, I'm noodling away still at the script for the 100 years of space opera video that I've been talking about for months. I've made a start, but not really much more than that. I've got a lot of work to do, and hopefully I can get some more work done on that this weekend. I've made a long list of books to consider for the best opening lines video, and I'm trawling through 1 whole year of comments on the channel looking for audience recommendations. I did 2 or 3 of those videos from about a year to 18 months ago, and I haven't done one for ages. I've habitually limited those videos to 10 books, but I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to trawl through the entire year, so 2024's comments, and I'm going to pull out Every time someone says that they've loved a book or they specifically recommend something, I'm going to put that in a list. I'll deduplicate them, and then we'll have a video that looks at all of those. If it's not too many, if it ends up being like 300 or something, then I can't do that in one video. But if it's manageable amount between 50 and 100, then I'll have them all, and I'll name check the people that made those recommendations. That's going to take me a while to compile. I'm at the end of March at the moment, and it's taken me 2 or 3 days of spare time scanning through the comments to extract the gold from the many comments that get left on my videos. There'll also be the aforementioned book haul video that'll arrive around mid-February, and I have a themed video in mind on alternate history, which will arrive at some point later in February, I think. On that alternate history themed video, do let me know if you've got any ideas. There are a few obvious ones, but let me know if you can think of any more obscure ones that I might not be aware of. What will I be reading in the coming week? I did not finish Sinners this month in January. Having sacked off Hard to Be a God, I didn't leave myself with enough time to finish this, and it's a little bit like Lady of Mazes. It's not an easy read. It's kind of densely described, so it's going to eat into my February reading a little bit. I'm hoping I'll be able to finish it this weekend, but I think this is one that will reward a more careful read. On audiobook, I'm about 2/3 of the way through Deathstalker, which has been tremendous fun so far. I think, given I'll be out on the trails for a few hours this weekend, I should finish that whilst I'm out, so that will be off my plate. They should go in February's wrap up, but I finished them soon enough. I might include them in Sunday's wrap up of January. I don't know. It's a bit arbitrary, but they should go in February's wrap up, which will be in a month's time. After Sinners, I'll be making a start on my February TBR pile. I want to kind of catch up try to avoid a cascading impact on my reading from Sinners being running in a couple of days into February. I'm going to pick the 2 shortest novels on my TBR for the month. So I've got Robert Silverberg's Downward to Earth, which I'm really looking forward to. Lots of people said I'm going to enjoy that. And then Robert Heinlein's book, which is just over 100 pages, going to be a really quick read, which again, lots of people have said they've enjoyed. And I'm interested in it because it came up in my Generation Ship video a few months back. That's everything. As usual, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you ever so much for watching. And until next time, goodbye for now.